of the BTPA, 23rd of September 20. Anybody got any declaration of interest to make before we proceed with this meeting? I'll look around and on the screen, nobody. Thank you. And also, just so that you are aware, the meeting is being recorded, as you've just heard, and there will be a meeting review led by Andy Cooper at the end of the session. Everybody okay with that? Okay, first item, minutes of the meeting dated 24th of June 20. What I propose to do is go through that page by page, and if you have any concerns or issues, then please shout out as we cover each page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, are the private session minutes available as well, or is that?
For members, they are, yes.
Yes, they are. Okay. So no points on the minutes? Can we take those as an accurate reflection of the meeting? Thank you very much. I'm going to turn your attention to the matters arising, please. I'm wondering what the pause is. It's me playing with both intelligence, which is way beyond me. Additional savings, serial 1. Any update to come on that?
I think that's now just part of the normal.
I think we've lost the Camden audio.
I think so.
Yeah.
You haven't. I think you're back now, is that right?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Hugh, yeah.
So I was saying that serial 1 in the actions is essentially now part of the normal wash-up process for the financial year 2019-20, and that will be completed before Christmas, hopefully some weeks before Christmas, but that will be swept up in that. And then I was also saying that the other actions on this list, Chair, are either complete, or I'm rather hoping that the update is full enough for members to understand where we're at just from reading it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any points to raise on any of the serials on this table? Thank you. We'll take this as dealt with. We're now at the Chief Constable's report. Paul, are you ready to give that, please?
Yes, I am, yeah. John, just as a matter of interest, really, are there any members of the public joining us?
No, not be notified, Paul,
no. No. Okay, so I've got that, fine. Okay, so I'll take it that colleagues and members have read the report. I'll just draw our attention to a few elements.
Paul, can I stop you for a second?
I just wanted to clarify that we are recorded and we're proposing to put the footage on our website, just for clarity.
So there's nobody from the public here, but we do expect to make the recording of this meeting public in due course.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Sorry, Paul. Please continue.
Yeah. So I'll just draw attention to a few elements. So in operational matters, I think it's quite an interesting thing around crime levels compared to passenger numbers. So 25 to 30% passenger numbers only. Yeah, 85% of crime and close to 100% of demand. And we've been doing some work to try to understand that. So does that mean that of the 25% of people who come back, that contains all the or a high proportion of people who have a propensity towards crime. I doubt it. It's probably more to do with the fact that the system, without barriers and revenue collection, is more of an open system, and people have got used to, I think, a less controlled area of public space. But does mean that as revenue collection comes back in, then there's some potential tension areas and conflict areas with rail staff, etc. We've got to plan our way through that. You'll see that last week was the County Lines Intensification Week. We've got a lot of coverage with that through MPs and including the police and minister and others. The team, together with people from across territorial policing, mobilised and were carrying out operations. We made 72 arrests over the period with some very significant safeguarding interventions of at-risk children who are, we believe, are subject to modern slavery and being trafficked under the county lines criminality. Just to give you some examples, 13-year-old boy in Kent, £1,500 in cash and a county lines deal phone, 15-year-old boy in Basingstoke with a load of drugs, another deal phone and cash. An adult at Basingstoke, whilst the local MP was present, actually, with 251 wraps of heroin. 2 boys in Hampshire counting out £3,000 in cash on the train linked to county lines. 16-year-old boy at Gloucester, 20 bags of heroin, and a number of safeguarding interventions where those children have been safeguarded, and in some respects, some families have been safeguarded because of the risks of the county lines serious organised crime networks. So a really important operation, but really important from the point of view of it showcasing again the force. So the police minister came out last Friday to his constituency in Andover. I joined the team out there with him. Interesting sort of arrest while we were there, from a link to a job in the railway station that led to arrests in the town centre. I was also joined by Mark Hopwood, so the MD for South Western, and on other examples we've also been joined by MDs from other TOCs, and that's been useful in, first of all, raising their awareness around county lines and vulnerability in general, but also demonstrating the links between this particular operation and the safeguarding on railway scheme, which is a requirement from DFT. So Mark Hopwood, interested in what we were doing, he made a pitch to Police Minister around the ongoing funding, which was useful. Equally, out at I think it was Swindon a couple of weeks ago, the MD for Great Western Railway joined Robert Buckland and the team out there and seen it. So it's been a really good exercise in raising awareness. I did speak to the Police Minister about the funding. So you know that we have 3 million of funding which runs through to the end of this financial year. As yet, we've not had confirmation of ongoing funding beyond that point, and Charlie's been engaged in discussions with Home Office. It's clear that the Police Minister very much values the operational work that we're doing, and we did have a discussion around the current debates that are going on to do with the 20,000 uplift and the Home Office desire, in the absence of other funding, to refund some of the 20,000 officers into serious organised crime, working from regional organised crime units and focusing on 4 strands of serious organised crime, one of which is county lines. And an interesting debate around, therefore, our 40 officers who are new officers, because although they're experienced people, we filled behind them, so they are uplift officers, potentially being counted within the 20,000 uplift, and whether that provided a route for more longer term funding around it. So an interesting discussion on that front. We've had 2 major incidents in the time frames, which you'll be very much aware of. So Stonehaven complex inquiry with some nuances around devolved administration and the involvement of politicians in Scotland and the involvement of politicians from Westminster, which was skillfully handled by Charlie, and also discussions with the Crown Office, who some of you at least will know very well, have a different role in investigations than perhaps the CPS down here. So the Crown Office directs investigations, and in this circumstance, the Crown Office directed that the lead police organisation would be Police Scotland. We've approached it from a very pragmatic point of view. We hold all the expertise and investigative skills in this area, and we're working together with Police Scotland and the ORR and RAIB in what is effectively a joint investigation, so that we can present the best possible evidence for around the cause and the implications for the people who were sadly killed. As of yesterday, the scene was handed back over to the industry for the full recovery phase. That's not to say that hasn't been going on in parallel, but there's been a formal handover of the site back to the industry as of yesterday. And then we also had the fire in Wales, which was particularly challenging and could have been had far more serious implications in terms of the amount of fuel that was on the wagons. But you will have seen, although thankfully nobody was seriously injured or killed, there was a very serious environmental potential impact from that, which needed to be managed as well as the scene. We mobilised resources from the Wales subdivision, but also from elsewhere in the force. Andy Morgan was the silver on site. Sean did a sterling job as gold, and chaired the strategic coordinating group meetings with all the other partner agencies, steering away through not just the actual incident management, but also some of the environmental issues, because they were so inextricably linked. So that investigation is ongoing. We're satisfied there's no criminality involved, and others are now taking that forward in terms of causation. In terms of COVID, clearly in the news with the announcements yesterday, I'm amazed but pleased to say that our abstraction rate remains at 1.15%, which is astonishing, frankly, across the force, and the people in BTP continue to respond incredibly well to that. We've been dealing with lots of challenges over the period of this report, including protests, unlicensed music events, Notting Hill Carnival, or if you like, not the Notting Hill Carnival, but working with colleagues around potential for unlicensed music events, and of course the ongoing focus around the coronavirus regulations, or the health protection regulations, and face coverings. And you'll see the data in there around interventions. You'll know from our previous briefings that enforcement is more than just issue of fixed penalty notices, and our approach is designed around compliance. And we've made, I think as of yesterday, 53,788 interventions, 3,781 directions to leave, and around 70 fixed penalty notices. Sean is currently working on, or in fact has been working on for about the last week, an update to our strategy, which moves us into a more focused, intelligence-led, targeted enforcement operation, taking account of feeds from the industry around areas of non-compliance, particularly around face covering, CCTV trawling that we're doing on a routine basis and on the, if you like, on a case-specific basis, and information coming from the I've forgotten the name of it, the Joint Biosecurity Centre, so that we can do some more targeted areas of focus in that regard. I touched on the Manchester inquiry. In terms of race and legitimacy, we've been really pushing hard on this, like to our moving the needle strategy, which focuses not just on internal matters around representation, fairness and development of black minority ethnic staff within the force, but also looks externally in terms of our use of powers and our legitimacy within communities. And I think I updated you before that we were seeking a senior leader to lead that work on a day-to-day basis. We advertised internally and externally. We had a really good, very strong field. And we interviewed and we selected a guy called Dennis Murray, who's a serving superintendent in Northants Police. Very experienced operationally, so great credibility operationally, very experienced in community and legitimacy and all of those issues, and also very much steeped in some of the internal activities, and in fact was chair of the Northants Black Police Association, I believe, for a period of time. So an all-round strong set of skills, which I think are going to be really useful to us in this regard. Excuse me, Dennis joins us on a secondment for 3 years. Really looking forward to him joining us. He'll be with us, I think, in the beginning of November. He brings with him, as I say, lots of experience and a national profile in this area. And he's also someone who aspires for more senior rank and is well tipped, I think, for things like PNAC and future advancement in that way. So overall, I think we are, as a panel, we were really delighted with the field that we got, and we're delighted with the selection that we have. All of the candidates that we interviewed appeared before a people panel, met a number of our Black minority ethnic staff and others, and they gave us a useful insight to our interview process. But I think universally there is people are very pleased with the selection, so I think that sets us off on a very good trajectory. Also been discussing with Kent Police, who I think are also quite forward thinking in this area, and there may be an opportunity for us to collaborate with Kent and do something which could be, provide a lead regionally, if not nationally, in how these sorts of issues are taken forward. So I'm really pleased with that. You'll see the update on stakeholder meetings, continue to meet with people from government and from MDs. And then the last point would be, sadly, we've tried all sorts of ways to make sure that we could continue the recognition that we normally do. That's proving nigh impossible with COVID. And so we are looking at some novel and different ways that we can continue to recognise people for long service and commendations. But it probably means that we won't do the Make the Difference awards that we've done for the last 2 years this year, which is a shame. I'll pause there, Chair, for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Bill.
I'll mention it here rather than in the SRPC report, but just wanted to commend the Force D Division and those that travelled in from elsewhere for the support of the aftermath of the events at Stonehaven. Paul mentioned them. It was a horrible situation at many levels. And on top of that, there were the kind of slightly more complicated than they needed to be matters behind the camera as well. So I appreciate how sensitively that was dealt with. It was a great example of Police Scotland and D Division and others working together in an entirely seamless fashion. And one of the staff associations asked to speak up at the SRPC just to say thank you for the arrangements that have been put in place to support officers on the scene and officers who thank you, Paul, and the team for the efforts in that regard.
Thank you, Bill, for that feedback. And it was interesting actually. So Charlie went up there, and Charlie being, I was going to say a new joiner, but he's hardly a new joiner for BTP. But probably the first time he's been at one of those big incidents, and he can speak for himself. But I know he was impressed with how the force just mobilised and responded to that incident as we always do. So thank you for that feedback.
Good. Anything else from anybody, ladies and gentlemen?
Yes.
Yes, Stella. Mute. Stella, we can't hear you.
Well,
I'm sorry, Stella.
Okay. I should just mention, Paul, that I was very grateful for the phone call from Sean to brief me about the Llangennych incident, and then to congratulate subsequently Andy Morgan's efforts there. And he was a tremendous communicator in Welsh and in English. I watched him on the news bulletins, and I thought that the BTP came out of that very well indeed. And thankfully, the train was due to go through Cardiff Central and then through the Severn Tunnel. So if there was going to be an incident, Llangenech, you know, wasn't the worst place it could have happened. But sadly, it was a terrible accident in that one of the brakes on the wheels failed, so the wheel was red hot and melting. So that caused the derailment, apparently. But it could have been so much worse in a more populated area.
Can I thank you very much for that, Stella? Before we go any further, just so that colleagues are aware, I'm now told that Mark Newton, member of the public, is online. Everybody knows Mark. Mark, are you there? Mark?
Chair, yes, thank you. I'm here. Just
Welcome, Mark.
the buttons. Thank you.
Yeah, just carrying on. We're at the stage of the Chief Constable's report, which we're discussing. Paul, is there anything else you would like to add to what you've said?
I was going to apologise to Stella for not attempting to pronounce where the fire was. I apologise. I've had several goes, but I just couldn't do it. So.
You're very lucky because I've got you a place on a long Welsh language course, Paul. So enjoy that online.
Yeah, I have
Mark has a question.
It strikes me that we ought to start thinking about a bit of a process about who's talking to whom or which organisation about funding. So in the early part of your paper, or more in the discussion actually, Paul, you talked about discussions that you and fellow force officers were having with various government bodies and agencies about possible funding routes. But I think as an authority, we do need to have clarity about who is talking on that, as opposed to the expenditure part, which is definitely a force matter, whereas the funding bit is an authority matter. And I think we need to have a bit of a process around how that's dealt with, otherwise we are going to get ourselves in a bit of a muddle around this. I don't know if you've got a view on that.
I mean, as far as I heard from Paul's report, really the discussions about county lines funding and in the continuation thereof, or the conversations you may have had with ministers through recent events. And I'm basically, I know those are happening. And likewise, I think with the correspondence between secretaries of state, which members will have seen, those are shared with the force. So I actually think, I mean, I was going to come to this on my update, that there are a few conversations going on. Some are led by the authorities, some are led by the force, but by and large, Paul and I are keeping each other in touch. And whilst we don't know the minutiae of every single conversation, we do know those conversations are going on. So personally, I can give you some reassurance on that at this point in time.
Quick question.
Yeah, Graham.
Hi, Paul. With my pensions working group hat on, you mentioned the reason why the new officer wasn't coming over to BTP was a pension issue. Without going into too much detail, can you give us a gist of the reason why that was?
So, and this comes about, Graham, because there used to be a parity arrangement around transferability between Home Office pensions and BTP pensions. When the government changed the structure for Home Office police pensions and brought in the care scheme with tapered relief on it, we didn't, because actually we saw that there was a kind of discrimination issue with that, which meant that there was no parity and the Home Office wouldn't allow the transfer between. Actually, there's been a court case subsequently where the Home Office or the government approach has been found to be unlawful, and that's currently being unwound. So there probably is an opportunity for us to, at some stage, revisit this and go back and seek a parity agreement between them. But right now, there isn't. If you remember, this was an issue with some firearms officers who transferred over, but it's particularly acute with someone who is that late in service, who would be effectively delaying when they could take their pension by several years.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Any other points or queries from colleagues regarding Paul's report? Thank you very much for that, Paul. You're still in the chair, as it were, in terms of briefing, because the next item is your annual report. Anything you'd like to say on that, please?
So just a very few things, if I may, Chair. So a slightly different approach this year, in that having looked at the structure of it, what we've tended to do is to use this annual report as an external report, and we sort of published it to the world, rather than when actually the requirement is for me to submit it to the authority and then a requirement to publish it. So I was trying to get the sequencing more aligned with what it should be this year. But of course we then got to make sure that it appeals to both audiences, hence why there's a bit in there explaining how the force is structured, etc., to bring that to life. There are a couple of areas which I guess are relevant to the discussion earlier. So I touch on the ambitions around technology in terrorism. I touch on the funding issue around that and the particular challenges we had in 1920. And when you get to the statistical bulletin, there are some trends in terms of crime, which are also reported in the BTP annual report, I have to say. But because they're broken down in more granularity, perhaps, potentially attracts attention, although I have to say thus far we've had very little traction on the report. But the statistical report identifies a 7.6 overall increase in crime with shrinking passenger numbers. The chance of becoming a victim is it's 22.7 crimes per million passenger journeys compared to 20.8 in the year before that. But that's been a changing trend over the last 3 or 4 years, and is almost like the charging model. There are different proxies that play in there. You've got passenger numbers which have been reducing and some increase in crime, and that can create some sort of potentially disproportionate view of how crime's going. The data is broken down by divisions, and in B division splits it into B division South, North and Central. Central is effectively TfL services, and you'll see particularly a 23% increase in crime in the Central subdivision during that period in time. So there are some areas of that could generate some potential interest externally. And then I think on 2 points I make, which I probably made in other forums with the authority on page 4, the issue this year around policing agreements. So we still need to at some stage address the HS1 position and just be clear about how we are building our pitch around the Elizabeth line when that finally comes, when it finally comes online. And the point I referred to earlier on pages 3 and 11 around outstanding capability gaps. But other than that, I think it broadly reflects matters which were perhaps shown in a different way, but nonetheless within the BTPA annual report.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or points that colleagues wish to put to the Chief Constable? Paul, thank you very much. There are no comments from authority members. On that basis, I'm just asking my colleagues if they would be prepared to note the report. Yeah. Thank you. The report is duly noted, and I'm particularly pleased to see that we have more BTP officers on the ground than certainly in the recent and longer past, and that's a good thing, I think. So thank you very much for that, Paul. Next, we turn to the Chief Executive.
Thank you. I think for those on the line, we're just turning the microphone around to try and make it a little bit easier for you to hear me. So no doubt, we'll raise a hand if that's not true. Chair, was going to mention up to half a dozen elements very swiftly of my update. So it's a written update. You can read it. I'm very happy to take questions. The ones I would pull out just to comment on orally are, first of all, a section on strategic funding, which goes to the point that Mark raised recently, really. So members will have seen recent exchanges of correspondence between the Secretary of State of Transport and Home Secretary just around or an involvement of the British Transport Police in the 20,000 uplift, covering a large number of other issues. But I think the highlights are also the independent financial arrangements about the emergency services network. So members will have seen that correspondence. All I would say is that is still live, but I do think it is about basically now the uplift and ESN. Those are the two things that are live at that most strategic level with the Home Office, albeit we might think it is more live than they do. I think it's entirely consistent with that. To Mark's point earlier, that Paul is having separate conversations with the policing minister and others about county operations and the funding levels for that. In a sense, we're going away at two corners of the same envelope, but we are both aware of what each other's doing, and certainly in the relation to the strategic issues, it is a longer term discussion. It is not just about financial provision for next year, for example. That was the first point I was going to raise. Second point, what I've called in the note temporary funding. Just one thing I wanted to call out for members to note. This is kind of business as usual funding arrangements and the particular disruption of this financial year from COVID. So were we to run our normal arrangements, the provisional charges we charged out to train operating companies in December of last year would be updated after the end of this current financial year on the basis of all the operational data from this current financial year. So all the timetable kilometres, all the crime numbers, various other proxies, all of those have been very significantly affected by COVID, mostly not down to the actions of the operators themselves. And our proposition at this point in time to the Department for Transport is that we simply don't uprate those charges as we normally would, but we stick with the provisional allocations already allocated. This is not about the total amount of money we charge out. This is just about the allocation to police service agreement holders. So the proposal is with the Department for Transport. We have started a conversation, very early stages, with RDG colleagues and Mark, who is about if DfT agree that's a sensible way ahead, how would we reach agreement with PSA holders? Because on the face of it, we need agreement from every single PSA holder to make that change. So that is a lot of work. Actually, I'm saying I want to finish it by Christmas, but I do think, and there's nothing from members at the moment other to know that we are engaged in that. I think the gain for the industry is the reduction in the volatility of our charges, which has actually been a bone of contention for some time. I can see that Mark wants to ask something there, Ron, so I might stop. That's, yeah, Phillips.
Mark, sorry.
It was just to check whether non
in the paper we have submitted to the DfT, who do stand behind the lion's share of our funders, we have set out a position of how this would work for all the other funders and how we would approach them if the DfT are comfortable with our core proposition. So we believe there is a way through with everybody, but we don't want to start that until we know that DfT are happy with the core proposition. That was temporary funding. That was my second point. Third point, sort of getting more tactical. You will note in the paper this financial year, Performance and Delivery Committee STORE and others will have seen the assessment that there will be around about £9 million of extra gross net costs due to COVID. So up to £9 million extra. Up to 3 million of that is already cleared and sorted as surge funding, which the department will provide as and when the Chief Constable feels it is needed in support of the step down and step up of COVID restrictions. A further 1 million is under discussion, which was specifically for PPE provision for the force. That leaves 5 million of extra costs, which is still under discussion between British Transport Police, ourselves and the department. Once those conversations with the department have concluded, members will be able to decide again, I think towards the end of this calendar year, which of the various routes open to you, you would look to fund that 5 million. That could be that the department helps. It could be that you look to access your reserves. It could be another formulation. Again, no decision for you, but this is just an indication of the kind of work the executive is engaged in. Trying to move on, Chair. The Chief mentioned the Elizabeth line, so I've put a note in that. We have been talking to the force. We wish to devise a formulation which will assess any permanent core increase in the policing need arising from the opening of the Elizabeth line when that happens. I feel we've made good progress with colleagues in the force, and I think that possibly in the MTFP discussions this December, but if not in the year after, the authority will be able to consider an evidenced case for more provision for that, and we'll be able to agree or not. But I think it's a significant bit of work and establishes the principle, but where there is a large increase in infrastructure, we do carry out an assessment of whether extra costs should be levied. I've got another question, Chair, I can see from Graham at the end, so I might.
Just a quick one. Do we have a date to the opening of Elizabeth line?
I might ask the Deputy Chair, but the answer is no. I don't think this is going to materially to impact the next financial year. Is what I would say to that. As far as we're concerned.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump past some of the elements in my update because they will be covered by the committee updates further in the meeting, particularly pensions I'm jumping past. I wanted to say a significant area of activity of the executive is in relation to audit recommendations, and then I'll follow up to it. This is both with the Deputy Chair and the Chair have pressed us to do this. There might be an opportunity to update on that under the ARAC update later. Actually, you will see a quite detailed spreadsheet. That is the start of some detailed follow-up of those kind of actions. Partly in light of the audit opinion we had last year, and partly for good governance anyway, the executive is ratcheting up its work, and I wanted to draw that to your attention. Nearly there. The last paragraph talks about the executive team itself. We've been working with Simon from the Force to move to find a space in Force headquarters that we can utilise from November of this year when our lease in Camden Street expires. With the current situation, we simply cannot continue that lease as it naturally expires in November. So we are talking about finding some space where we can operate from, admittedly in a COVID environment. So partly because of the speed we're doing this at, partly because of COVID, it may be that we're reaching an interim solution. But in any case, that is our plan to do that from November. We will also see in that note some talk about some new members of our executive team who are in various stages of recruitment. We've talked about a board secretary that we hope to make an imminent appointment. We've talked about a contract manager that is close-ish to appointment. And then we have Katie on maternity cover and our agency worker on a charging model who are being recruited. So there's 4 posts in recruitment. I just wanted to bring to your attention. Last thing I was going to mention, you're free to ask any questions in the update, it's just that we will ask you to approve the plan for the board effectiveness evaluation for next year under this item. And in very high level terms, and can't see Lucy's face to see if I get this right, it will simply be the same methodology we did last year. We had a very good conversation this morning about trying to implement the results of that methodology. We think it would be great to be consistent and use the next evaluation as a sort of temperature check to see how we're going along that road. I don't think any of the actions really from last year will be fully finished by the time we start to do the next evaluation. So it will be good to do the evaluation in the same format and essentially see how much progress we've made. Those are things I wanted to draw out from a written report, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions from people either in the room or on the line.
Any questions or points from members? Anybody else? Paul, you've got your hand up?
Yeah. Chair, so just in terms of 9.1, I think it's a little premature to say that that's the plan. I think that we've seen any paperwork or suggestions about how many or how often people would want to be accommodated, and there are lots of other buildings that we could look at as well. So I think it's a little premature to say that that's the plan for an interim solution. I think we need to see what the proposal was and what the ask was.
Okay, well, so we've been having conversations with your teams, Paul, but perhaps we'll take it offline because I felt we were quite well progressed, but we'll provide whatever's needed.
Yeah.
Anything else for anybody? So 2 things, if I may. First, I would ask members to note this report and also to agree that the board effectiveness evaluation follows the same format for this next year as it has been for the last year. Is that correct? Agreement? Thank you. That's noted and agreed. Paul, Hugh, thank you very much. Next item is item 7, strategic finance. Who's going to lead on this, please? Is it Sarah or is it?
I think it's me again, if that's
Okay,
right.
yes.
Chair, so there are 2 points. One is the spending review situation, and another is an update on our medium-term financial plan for next year. On the spending review, all I was going to do was draw members' attention to the papers that are on board intelligence. They were B045. Essentially, that was the submission that the authority put in at the end of August, and since then we have had not enormous amount, but a fair amount of flurries of further questions from the department for clarification and more evidence to be provided. But as I heard from the department yesterday, they are, I think this week, planning to finish their departmental position, which then goes into the Treasury, and then I think sometime around the end of October or November we find out the results. Our broad position was to have what I would call a kind of flat real provision on ordinary revenue spend. That was the broad position. That in itself, we did draw to people's attention, does require a 5 million compound efficiency need every year. So that is just built in anyway because of the essentially the incremental pay awards that we still operate. Alongside that, there were some lumps of expenditure which you'll have seen, and I don't necessarily need to draw out here, but they were for particular capital for provision for particular comments, and are enjoined in the department with the department in a conversation about our most recent pension valuation, which very closely mirrors the similar conversation which is happening with the railway pension scheme as a whole. So that featured as part of our spending review submission. I think it's just too early to say anything that I'm getting back from the department. I quite understand they have much larger financial fish to fry, and actually I have not felt a large amount of attention from them. That doesn't mean to say we won't get any surprises, but the papers are there, and I'm quite happy to take questions of clarification or for information, but I haven't got nothing to feed back to you in terms of the answers yet.
Any questions or points for you? So can we?
I can see Paul.
Paul, have you got your hand up?
It might be an old hand up.
It was an old hand up, but is she going to go on and talk about the MTFP, or is that a pause for the whole paper? Yeah, so I'll come back in then if I can. Thank you. I'll take my hand down.
Okay, thank you.
So then the MTFP, second bit, we could take this here or under the Strategy and Planning Committee feedback, but I think it's better to take it here. Essentially, the Strategy and Planning Committee, I think last week, in a kind of normal business cycle, took an item which was to agree with the force and parameters for the MTFP to be built and approved by the end of this year at the next full authority meeting. I think you have 2 papers which are attached to this item. One was written, produced by the executive, and another is a kind of force paper that goes alongside it. I mean, I think just candidly, and Paul will have his own view, I would say that the Strategy and Planning Committee didn't have a meeting of minds as to precisely the approach we could take, and therefore the chair deputed the executive and the force with some member support as necessary to go away and have further conversations to make sure that such disagreements as exist can be resolved in good time for the December meeting rather than be, as it were, played out at the December meeting. I think, in my words, what is the nature of the disagreement? Essentially, the authority position as laid out is the MTFP last December was covered a 5-year period, so there is an identified amount for the following financial year, and we are very interested to see any reasoned case for departing from that amount from the last financial year. I don't think the force accepted the challenge in exactly those terms, and that's the nature of the disagreement between us. But for now, that is where the challenge rests from the authority's perspective, that there is an award from last year, which has already been identified for the next financial year, and we will be very interested in seeing a reasoned case to depart from that. Absent a reasoned case, members might decide to stay with the decision previously taken.
Thank you very much. Any questions or points for Hugh? Charlie, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I guess just really from an operational perspective, that obviously achieving a balanced budget within that settlement effectively is currently requiring me to hold vacancies in my command, and I know Sean and support departments in theirs. So I guess it's just really to ensure members are cited that the budget settlement that was agreed in December has required us to put sort of artificial measures in place to achieve that balanced budget. So we've either had to hold the vacancies or slow recruitment. And in my command in particular, 2/3 of which has been through a review process based on a sort of evidence-based demand, that is without pain in terms of delivering the full strategy. So I suppose I just wanted to make sure that members were cited that this is having an operational impact, albeit we are doing our best to manage that impact. I think we've been helped to some extent by COVID, but at some point business will return to normal. And again, certainly in my command, the vast majority of drop-off has been in volume crime, and yet a lot of the serious and complex crime is still there. And in fact, in some cases, we are dealing with higher volumes than we have in previous years. So I just wanted to make sure members were aware of the operational impacts of that budgetary settlement.
Thank you, Charlie. Paul, you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So Hugh's summary was a pretty accurate one, actually. So I don't think anyone fell out, but there's a difference in sort of starting points, and this is the bit that we'll need to work through. I think Charlie's touched on some of it. I think we would draw attention to some of the data in the annual report from 2019, with a year when we had to hold 110 vacancies and crime went up and stakeholder confidence went down, and that formed the basis of the budget settlement for this year and therefore the years going forward. So we have that to apply our mind to. But you yourself, and I think we all agree, said how pleased we are that police officer numbers are up to strength. And without being over dramatic, with a settlement based on what was in the budget last year, we would have to lose some of those police officers. But and hopefully that's not waving a shroud around. We've done lots of work on it, but as we've always said, we can live within whatever budget it is. We just all need to understand what the implications are. So I think our aim is to work it through, work out the numbers that we think are required and therefore what the cost is. So a lot of it is built upon 148 sites, which the industry endorsed at the September meeting, with a certain roster pattern that delivers, that you require a number of people to do. You multiply those up, you get 80% of the costs largely. So we'll present that. We'll present what the delta is between that and what a roll forward would be, and then we'll hopefully dispassionately talk through what the implications are. I said to the strategy committee, and hopefully I tried to keep too much emotion out of it. I won't be here for this. What I'm really keen to do is that we give the new chief constable a flying start and not a position where he or she has got to start by looking to take officers or staff out of the structure. But we will do that in a dispassionate way and present the facts.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So, do any of my colleagues have any further points or questions?
And I guess because Andrew's not here, I mean, I think what Hugh has said and what the Chief Constable has said is what we agreed in terms of how we were going to take it forward. And I think it's fair to say that the members are not unsympathetic to what's been asked. I think we just needed to agree where we're going to start the discussion from, and then bring forward the deltas, both positive and negative, which can then be discussed and understood before bringing a proposal and recommendation forward to the full authority. So I think that's the right way. Personally, I think that's the right way to do it, and I'm glad to hear that we're all in agreement on that.
Right, anybody else? So shall we agree then to proceed on that basis for the decision last year to stand? And obviously, as Paul has said, the evidence will be brought forward to the contrary if such evidence exists, and it will be debated dispassionately at the time. Thank you very much. Okay, item 8, pensions working group. Now, Bill, do you want to?
I can be really brief, Chair. There are minutes of the July meeting in the pack. We've since had a meeting in September. We're basically spending most of our time talking about a couple of areas of pension activity. One is the staff scheme. So, as members will recall, we are closing the staff scheme to new entrants, or we're planning to. That appears to be it's slightly slower than we would have intended, but work is now moving forward on that, and the consultation for that is about to begin, with the intention of to effect the outcome of that at the beginning of next year. On the staff scheme in its entirety, both new members and current members, it's in the process of valuation, and closing the scheme to new members has an impact on the valuation in terms of decisions that are made on investments by the trustees. But it sounds to me like an advisor making good progress on balancing out both sides of that equation, and we're hopeful of a positive result on that valuation. On the officer scheme, where the valuation fell due at the end of 2018, we've not yet agreed the valuation. And frankly, it's a much bigger debate and discussion on that valuation than certainly my pay grade. Hugh hinted at, I think, some of the matters that are involved there. I think there are some clever ideas on how we can reduce the potential liability. We have to see how those progress. And key to it all, I think, is trying to enable dialogue between the regulator and the other parties in the valuation debate. Hugh, do you want to add anything to that?
I think I'd like to leave it with your suggestion that it's being managed and there are some innovative ideas, but we need to get them squared off by all parties, because it is definitely, like I said earlier, part of our overall spending review discussion. That may or may not help, but it does mean we certainly need to see the spending review complete before we go down other avenues.
Okay, thanks for that, Bill and Hugh. Are there any questions or points from colleagues? Paul, you've got your hand up.
I'm sorry, yeah, sorry, mistake.
Okay. Can we note this report then, please? Yeah. Thank you. The next report is the Appointments and Remuneration Committee, which is my committee. I don't really want to raise any specific items in any great depth, but I think the key thing for this meeting was the police officer pay award of 2.5% increase, and that was subject to just a hold until we got some further information from the force, which we subsequently received. And I believe that the pay rise has been implemented with officers' September pay. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. So, and there are further discussions underway with the unions in respect of the police staff pay rise.
That's correct. We're waiting for a response from TSSA.
Thank you very much. And I think that really concludes anything I want to say at this stage, unless anybody has any points or questions regarding the Appointments and Remuneration Committee report. Are we content to note it? Yeah. Thank you, duly noted. Next, we have Transformation Working Group.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'll keep this short. Members have seen the minutes, hopefully, of it. There's one substantial item that we come on to later on about the approval of the Birmingham business case. And thank you for all the work the team have done on that collectively, and a really good session going through that before it went on into further committee structures. The only other one on there I draw people's attention to, because it fits with some of the medium-term financial plan debate, is some of the scenario work we talked about under item 4 there. Don't read anything into a 5% reduction or higher. It doesn't mean we know anything that others don't. It was just to give some parameters to try and think, what would we do if we suddenly get a worse settlement collectively in this space than we think we're going to get for the future. So it's there for people's information, but thank you for the support and work done in the group.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody, any questions or points in relation to that? Can we take that as duly noted? Thank you very much. Bill, the Scottish Railways Policing Committee, please.
Thank you, Chair. You have in your pack draft minutes of the meeting we held at the beginning of September. The only other committees, which is a public committee, and we had quite a number of people of the public who joined us, mostly staff associations and a little bit of media. So it was not long after the sad derailment at Stonehaven. We talked a little bit about that. It's turning into, I think, a very positive, constructive and useful meeting, and there's very good participation from both D Division colleagues, from Force Headquarters. Very much appreciate Adrian coming to the meeting on a regular basis, and Police Scotland are more actively participating. The last couple of meetings we've had as an observer, HMICS, the Scottish Inspectorate, which has been useful, and they've been positive about it as well. So lots of good evidence comes up at every meeting of joint working between our force and Police Scotland, and that comes from both sides of the table, if you will. And we're now getting down to, I think, a good and frank conversation about how we measure the effectiveness of the committee, and how we start looking at I suppose, the thorny issue of best value. But I think that there were constructive inputs from the force and from John McBride, our current board secretary, on that matter, that seem to go down well with members of the committee.
Good. Any questions or points for Bill, please? Thank you. We'll duly note these draft minutes. Thank you very much. Performance and delivery, Dominic?
Yeah, similarly, Chair, draft minutes of the meeting with Performance and Delivery Committee of the 8th of September. I think the draft minutes cover all the ground that we went through at the meeting, cover that well. Many of the themes I think we've already touched on today, particularly by the Chief or the Chief Executive, the whole issue around legitimacy and disparity, of course, which has been touched on earlier on. I think we were particularly impressed with the presentation we saw put together with the force, by the force with Penna, which shows the sort of BTP brand and what the BTP brand stands for and will stand for, and that will undoubtedly help with recruitment and addressing the sort of the diversity and inclusivity agenda. It was a very high quality piece of work and very engaging piece of work. We were pleased to see, obviously, officer headcount up, really great work by the recruitment and training teams there, and obviously looking to maintain those numbers per the discussion we were having earlier on about budget and next year's budget particularly. So we'd obviously like to see that protected. PCSO numbers obviously need some addressing, but that's because our great PCSOs have fed through into officers. As regards recruitment and diversity, obviously we talked about very helpful to have targets, and particularly regional, local targets, so that we can better track how we're doing through the different grades in the force, but obviously particularly against how we're doing against the makeup of the regions, particular regions that we serve. So we thought that would be helpful. But we did also note that obviously a significant slowdown in turnover, and particularly in light of forthcoming sort of shocks to the economy, and then clearly our ability to use that sort of higher turnover to change the makeup of the staff and the force and the like is obviously hampered somewhat by that much lower turnover. It's a blessing in one way, but obviously it hampers our change agenda. Finance performance, we talked about the 9 million surge, 3 million of that's found, and obviously Hugh talked about the rest, the discussions we're having with DFT. Operational performance, again, Adrian took us through that. Unusual times, but obviously great efforts in terms of COVID-19 response. And yet, in spite of a sort of much quieter railway, of course, very busy on things like county lines and indeed robbery, which we talked, again, the Chief has touched on earlier. I think that would be it, Chair.
Thanks, Tom. Does anybody have any questions or points for them? Are we therefore content to note this report?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mark, audit risk, please.
Thank you, Chair. We had our meeting on the 10th of September, slightly lighter than the summer meeting, is where we are in the cycle of business. We had a presentation on work that's been ongoing on cyber security, and I think we recognise the good work that the team are engaged in and delivering in that area. We took the risk dashboard, and again, I think we commend the quality of the work that's been done producing the high-level enterprise risk dashboard. But we really do want to encourage the force to progress to get the risk post filled, so we can get the bottom-up risks properly identified and the process well embedded as soon as possible. We had a paper from the authority's CFO, where we went through a range of topics. I think there's nothing there specifically that we need to bring to the authority's attention. We did take a paper about exploring the opportunity to transfer the Treasury function from the force into the authority, and we look forward to seeing more work on that in the coming weeks and months. We had the BTP quarterly update, and again, I think recognise the good work in progress, the recommendations from the GIA audits, and some of the more routine areas in terms of managing some of the HMRC work in the custody and disruption work that they've been doing. We had the GIA's report itself, and there's a wider pack of recommendations that are attached to this, which I won't go through today, but it does demonstrate the follow-up work that's been done in that area. We had a short update from KPMG, our external auditors, about the completion of their work that was outstanding from the summer. And we took a little bit of work from HMRC on further governance issues. But I think other than that, a pretty shortish meeting compared to some of our more recent ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or points for Mark? Thank you. We'll note that report. Content. Thank you very much. Strategy and Planning Committee.
I think I was going to try and do this because I'm in the room. Stella or Willie on the line could support, or Kenna, who was in the room, who were also in the meeting. But so this was the Strategy and Planning Committee meeting, I think the 16th of September, not looking at my agenda right now. A significant part of our discussion was about the MTFP, which is a discussion we've already had in this meeting. Another significant part was further work on what we might call a reset of the transformation plan. That is, Craig has already fed that into the meeting. That's really in partnership with the work of the Transformation Working Group too. The only two elements I was going to bring to the attention of members under this update, Chair, are two business cases which were approved by the Strategy and Planning Committee, but which do formally have to be adopted by the full authority. You'll see, starts actually at page 178 on your pack, is a small note from Sam just setting out what those two business cases are. One is around relocation of the Waterloo hub, Waterloo station, and another is about a sort of not quite headquarters building in Birmingham, but anyway, the move of the sub-headquarters building. We might take them one by one, and we might do Waterloo first because it's simpler. But I think, I mean, my summary, I know Simon's on the line, who can probably offer more, and Sam drafted the covering note. But essentially, this is about finding premises for our officers to use in Waterloo Station. It's been a problem for a little while that they haven't had this, and have been travelling from London Bridge, I think, at times. Actually, the only reason I think this is before the full authority is because it requires a 525,000 capital spend, which is of a level that does require our approval. The Strategy and Planning Committee went through this and were happy to give it their approval, and I think, proportionate with the amounts of money involved, you've probably spent more time on the Birmingham business case than this one. But my first question is whether there were questions about this one, or whether the members are happy to adopt the recommendation of the Strategy and Planning Committee to let this office procurement go ahead.
First of all then, colleagues, are there any questions or points for Hugh, or indeed if any of the members of the committee want to chip in on the Waterloo Hub relocation business case? Are we content to approve it?
Yes, crack on.
Approved, thank you. Okay, Hugh?
And then the second thing was just the situation with office accommodation in Birmingham. Again, Simon knows a great deal more about this than me and will help with questions from members. My potted history, which starts much more recently than some others, is that in fact the authority was in a position just less than a year ago to approve a particular course of action in an outline business case of moving in with a new development in the centre of Birmingham, but the developer, being LCR, decided not to proceed with that option, and we now need to make a different decision. I have for some time, with Simon from the Forces help, been talking to the Department for Transport about what are the real deadlines here, when do we really need to vacate the Axis building for redevelopment, are they really serious about exercising a compulsory purchase option, which they do have in relation to, we would be the last tenants in that building, I think shortly, certainly by the first quarter of next year. So I'm satisfied that the Department for Transport are serious and that they would want us out and are prepared to allow LCR to exercise compulsory purchase powers from December 21. So that's an answer to one possible question for members, which is, particularly these uncertain times, it will always be better to wait to see how the office need pans out, or indeed the local market pans out. But I feel like the department really do want us to exit by December 21, so decisions are due now, if not a little while ago. And then the second point I would raise was just being, this is an outline business case. The case identifies a particular proposal of a property that the force would move into. There will be further negotiations based on the costs of the move and indeed the rental costs as we go forward, which will come back as a full business case before people proceed. But at this stage, you're asked for approval to the outline business case. I think just because this one's a bit more complicated, I might see whether Simon wants to add something to my précis.
Yes, please, Simon, have you got any comments you want to make?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Hugh. It's just a couple of additional points. I think the first point is, as Hugh has said, this is clearly the outline business case. We have got to tender for the full work services. We have a draft heads of terms, but we've not yet concluded the lease. We've got to sort of finalise some of the floor space planning. So there are a number of stages which are still to be moved through, which clearly will take through the relevant committees. It's worth saying up front that we've made clear to the department throughout that we required 18 months to execute this move, and we are clearly well within that timeline. So an area of focus for Hugh and I, because I think the principal risk once we've agreed to this is actually the operational risk, particularly around the business continuity for the control room and the contact centre, which would have to be relocated to the new location. So the principal risk is managing that interface. And a key area for Hugh and I, therefore, to leverage is that LCR and the department have got robust mechanisms by which they can deal with an extension of the demolition period in the event that we can't, even with best efforts, hit the December 21 deadline. The final point to note is the funding issue here. At the moment, we're still in negotiation with LCR, pretty fruitless at the moment, which is around what we think is a better level of compensation. They are adhering to what they think they owe us under the Landlords and Tenants Act, which is about 650k. Our professional advice suggests that it's well above that. Ultimately, we think it will be probably for the department to determine actually what the appropriate level is. But at the moment, as you see in the business case, the capital costs of this, which principally lie in a single financial year, are potentially up to in the order of £8 million, and that will require an adjustment to the current profile of the MTFP in order to accommodate that. If we're not to sacrifice a significant amount of money, which goes every year on the cyclic costs of the fleet and digital consumables. They're the principal areas I wanted to stress.
Thanks, Simon. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Okay, Heather?
And just a comment really on the recommendation that the authority is specifically being asked to agree, and the suggestion of a change of words. It recommends approving the outline business case for new premises for support. Noting full business case should come back before the project commences. Well, the project has commenced and needs to continue. So I think the full business case comes back before the design and build contract is placed, the lease is signed. I think that's what I'd suggest is the word, perhaps the executive needs to decide the precise wording, but the project has commenced, it will continue, there's going to be design work going on. So, just for some decision and recommendation.
We looked at this in some detail at the working group, and I think Simon's put it very well in terms of the biggest risk now is time.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to give a clearer indication this is the way we're going, and give as much freedom as we legitimately can and ethically can to allow people to get on with this. In terms of doing it, that there'll be some nuances and trips along the way. I think is a given with something this complex and running at this sort of speed. But I think we have got to give as much freedom as we can.
Okay.
I think the only thing I would say is that obviously in terms of finalising the sort of detailed business case in the way that Ken suggested, of course we're going to expect to see lease prices, get significant downward pressure, and whether Baskerville House remains the best option in that case, I think should be still questioned. But not even if it is to be Baskerville House, then we need to make sure we're getting new market rents, because I think we can expect very significant efficiencies in that regard.
I think very often rent reviews in the leases are couched in terms of upward only, and I think the worst case for us ought to be they're reviewed in both directions. Would be the worst case upon which we accept it.
Yeah. Well, subject to that change recommended by Henna, are we content to endorse this outline business case?
Yep.
Yeah. Duly endorsed. Thank you. Before I hand over to Andrew for a review of the meeting, I just want to correct one omission on my part at the start of the public session. I forgot to say that we have had apologies from Andrew Pollins and Bev Shears, who are both absent and unable to attend. Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, good. Another meeting which has suffered from COVID, and the technology is getting better each meeting. This is another one where we're half on screen. Is that feedback? Half on screen and half live, as it were. So we'll keep working on that. Good that Mark Newton could join us. So thanks, Mark. We started late for good reason because of a briefing, but we've made up time towards the end, so that's good. I note really there have been fewer issues raised and less discussion around the table than we've been used to at some of the authority meetings. But I think that's a reflection of the papers, which were very informative and much more for noting rather than for discussion this time. There was nothing outstanding from last time, so that's a plus because it makes meetings purposeful if you're not carrying things forward endlessly. Good report from the Chief Constable, Paul, thanked, comprehensive, and really quite a lot of big ticket items this time. So good to hear what lies behind those, particularly the really serious issues that are picking up on the good work under county lines. And also, which is really a continuing theme, I have to say, the extraction rate on COVID from officers and staff at 1.5% is incredibly good and stands well against, I think, some of the other figures that you read about in the newspapers. Annual reports accepted, so that's good too, a good document for public consumption as well. Chief Exec's report, good to note that the strategic issues really are the focus, the uplift, and the ESN, where we appear to have a joint approach to working those through, so that's good, working in tandem, BTPA and BTP. We note the issue about getting out of the forum, which I guess is inevitable now, and hopefully with the work that we're doing between the two parties, we can find some hot desks, if nothing more. Hopefully we're not bringing more paper than we need to these days. It's the opportunity to move offices. And I think finally the good news is that we have got a way of having sensible discussions and options as a route to sorting the MTPF issues and how we go forward before the December meeting. So I think the mood music there was pretty good in terms of working to try and find a solution with an open mind really on both sides. So pleased to see that. We're well within time.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Anybody want to come back at any of that?
No, thank you.
Finally then, any other business going around the table, first of all, anybody? On screen, anybody? Ladies and gentlemen, I now declare this meeting closed at 15:38. Thank you.
Thanks very much.